Good morning. Good morning. Good to see y'all. I know the weather may be a little inclement, but we're glad that y'all were able to weather it, as they say. That's not my joke for the day. Okay, fine. Well, we are glad to have you for our ongoing series of eggs and issues, and we are certainly thankful for our ongoing sponsor of this series, House and Healthcare, and also for our series sponsor, Synovus. And so I'm going to ask Jim Manley to come up and do the pledge and invocation.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, David, for that welcome. So, I don't know if you're relieved or excited that I'm here instead of Ron this morning. He's living without regrets. He's hunting with his young son this morning, so he's out in the woods. He's authorized me, I know, to unleash a barrage of dad jokes like this event has never seen before. And I have, but I personally had my own database of jokes, but I'm gonna release you from that this morning.
Thank you.
I'm gonna let that be Ron's realm, for better or for worse. All kidding aside, it's really exciting for Synovus to be part of this series. It's so professionally run, so the content is excellent, and I just have nothing but kudos for April and her team and what they do at the chamber here in Warner Robins. And among several really critical things that chambers do, effective chambers do, is really create a platform for business leaders to convene. And we're doing that again this morning, and Synovus is just glad to play its small, consistent part as a sponsor. And thank you for giving us this opportunity, April and her entire team. Join me in prayer this morning as we get started. As I thought about what to say this morning, I thought about the Advent season's right around the corner. And I hope that it'll create anticipation and also celebration for the season we're about to enter. And I think about community building, and I think, if you think about the two great commandments, loving the Lord first, but also loving your neighbor as yourself, it's a great way to think about community building too. Equip all these leaders, every household, every business, all of our elected leaders, to continue prospering in this city, in this county. It's very impressive what we've done, and it's also a bright future. And we thank you for all those gifts and blessings. We know that they come directly from you. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. We're going to do the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Jim, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. You know, today's session is sponsored by Houston County Galleria, and they have a brand new leadership, and they weren't able to attend today, but I'm sure if you've driven by the mall, you see a lot of things going on there, right? You see some development, and you see all the great things that they're bringing to our community and the investments they're making into our community. So if you get a chance to talk to them, thank them for all the things that they're doing for our community. You know, before we get into a discussion on housing, we're going to talk with the mayor of Centerville and that group. But after that, we're going to talk about something that's really pressing in our economy right now. When you think about housing and the lack of affordable housing, and entry-level starter homes, rising rate environment of our economy, what options do we have as a community to improve on that? Well, we've got Chris Denson, Director of Public Policy Research at the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. He's going to talk to us about that, and we're also going to field some questions from him. So stay around for that. But first, like my little teaser, but first, we're going to talk to the Mayor, John Hartley, and Economic Development Director, Shannon Bryant, with the City of Centerville, and then our President and CEO, April Bryant, will come on up and talk to them.
All right, y'all give them a big round of applause. excited to welcome the city of Centerville, Mr. Mayor. We missed out on having you last year with all the transitions with COVID and everything, so we're glad to have you back. Y'all got mics in your chairs there, and I know you guys, you know, the topic of housing is very appropriate considering all of the growth that you have, but just looking out, we've got a lot of Centerville leadership here with us. Let me do that for you. I got it.
She's not going to show me how to do it.
There we go. Yeah, that way he can't hold me hostage later. Yes, but we've got a lot of your leadership team here, Mr. Mayor, and we would love the opportunity for you to just introduce us to some of the people that make this all possible.
I'm very pleased to do that. Somebody asked me a while back, how does your city operate so successfully? You know, and I said, well, there's two things involved in it. One is faith, we have faith in each other, and the other is trust, we have trust in each other. So I could actually get any one of my council members up here, and they can sit here and do the same thing. So that's the way we operate. We always try to keep each other informed, what's going on, it works great. The same thing goes down to our management teams. Well, I should introduce my council members first. You know, post 1 is Bob Bird, who's unable to make it here today. Post 2 is Justin Wright. Justin has his hand up there. Post 3 is Michael Evans. And Michael, there he is. He's jumping up and down. He loves being in these events. Post 4, of course, is El Mijo, who's also the mayor pro tem this year. And that will change once in January. We have a new mayor pro tem. That'll be Councilman Bird. You know, the team, my management team down below us, because they're really the ones who run the city. No matter what anybody says, they really do it. They're in front of the city. They see the citizens every single day in all the events. City Attorney Becky Tidy, she couldn't make it here. She's in Atlanta at a meeting. And our Director of Operations is Mike Grunfield. Mike over there he is. There's Mike. Mike's also known as the memory bank of the city. You want to know anything about the city, Mike has it in his head. Somewhere in there, he knows where to get it. And we have our fire chief, Jason Jones. Been there with us for a while. We're doing an outstanding job. Our city clerk, Krista Benfield, who couldn't make it. She had a doctor's appointment scheduled before this, so. Our police chief, Cedric Duncan. Cedric's been with us for a while now, and he's created an outstanding team over there. And I get kudos all the time about how the police operate there in Centerville. Now, city accountant Carol Harrison, she gets us through all these budget meetings, and she gets us through all the audits that go on. So does a wonderful job of that. And our court clerk, Sarah Caldwell, who couldn't be here either. She's got some court business this morning. And the Director of Economic Development, of course, Shannon, right here. So glad to have her here with us. But you know, it takes more than just a team like that. It takes other parts of it. And one part is county commissioners, particularly Chairman Stockton. But the whole county commissioners has been supporting behind us. I've been the mayor now for 13 years, getting ready to start 14. And I can always count on them. And I'm sure I can still count on them. Thank you all, the county commissioners, for being here and you're part of our team. And the last piece of it, the big piece of the other mayors. All the other mayors, we all work together, and that's great. You know, we work like the county commissioners, we depend on each other, and it's gone from mayor after mayor. So it's outstanding. The Houston County is a great county. But that's my team, and I'm really proud of them.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and you really did hit on it. Houston County really has something unique here in the relationships among our elected leaders, the other community and business leaders here, all working together for the greater good. And although Centerville is geographically the smallest and by population the smallest, we're seeing the same trends all across our growing community with economic development, housing, and population growth. I know since the last time you were on this stage, and this is your first time, Shannon, so welcome. Centerville has seen a lot of growth in businesses, in housing units, and in population. Can you guys kick us off with that? And let's just talk about the growth, how the city's handling it, and the impact that it has.
Sure. Well, from the business standpoint of that,
We are at an advantage, I would say, it's an advantage and a disadvantage in that we have a difficult time having space available for business. All the retail space that we have, all the real estate that's available stays occupied, which is a really good problem to have. The mall stays full, the old Sears building, they've divided now into 3 parcels. You've got a gym that's about to open any day now, and a new home store that's going to go in the second part of that, and that leaves a small space that the mall is looking actively to fill. But that's really all the space that's available in the mall, all of our retail spots throughout town. We're at about 98% capacity on commercial space. So, we are small, but we are mighty, and we are a good place to do business. And I think that people have realized that it's easy to do business with the city. And so that is an advantage that we have in drawing in new business and also maintaining the business that we have.
Yeah, very good. So moving on to just housing units and population. I know some of that is annexation, but as I said, much like our county and our state continue to grow, we've seen a lot of that. In Centerville, can you talk about some of those numbers? And I know then we'll land on the newest housing development that everybody's probably seen and driven by and has questions about.
I remember back in Centerville in 1992, I guess it was, we had about 3,500 people in the city. Today, we've grown substantially. If you look on the table there's a chart that shows some growth, how the growth works in there, but the last 30 years. We've had, back in the year 2000, we were named the fastest growing city in the Middle Georgia area. I remember that was very good. And also recently, as you talked about annexation zone, we've annexed another 263.2 acres in the city in the last 2 years. And so that's growth coming in those areas right now, substantial growth. What can I say? That's really what's going on there. The environment is there, and we have a reputation for working with our developers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we do it quickly. We don't spend weeks and months talking about it. We just get it done, whatever needs to be done.
Well, and one of the prime examples of y'all getting it done is all of the tremendous work that went into and continues to go into Central Park. And all of the efforts surrounding that, creating a place where people can gather as families for community events and things like that. Can you give us a quick update on Center Park and what all you've experienced this summer and going into the rest of the year?
Of course. So Center Park, I was very fortunate when I came into this position that Center Park was up and thriving, and just, we've continued to see growth there. We just had our fall festival there, which I think the chief estimated about 10,000 people that we saw in that day coming and going through the park, enjoying the festival. We had a huge 4th of July celebration. The splash pad is always a popular spot for children of ages 2 to 82. I mean, people love the splash pad. And we continue to see growth there. We see activity. The pavilion stays booked with people doing things there. And from that kind of launching point, we've now started the work on our town center overlay. So we're going to have the Center Park kind of be the focal point heart of our town center, which will be a developed downtown area. We're in the process now of developing our overlay for that. That will lay the foundation for future development. Mixed-use development that will hopefully bring in more housing units as well as retail, shops for families to enjoy dinner before an event at the park, or ice cream after they left the park, or things like that. So that stays as our kind of focal point for development and building up and out from the park area.
That's very exciting. And speaking of housing, you can't ride by the mall and not notice the new development there in the back. Sheena, can you share with us, and Mr. Mayor as well, kind of how that came about, the progress? I know it's a multi-phase project, and just sort of, educate those of us in the room that may have questions about what that project is and what it means for growth and housing availability here in Houston County.
Well, that was an idea that came from a developer and the mall owners at the time. And they worked together to do it. They had to go to DCA, though, to Department of Community Affairs in Atlanta, some, credits, but they use those credits to actually develop the thing. We support that idea, because what they told us they were going to put in there were, low-income housing units, which are not Section 8, by the way. I'm talking about that's not Section 8. What it means is that there's a cap on when people go in there, they have a certain amount of salary level they have to have, minimum amount, in order to get into a house. And that's low income as far as they're concerned, the way the state looks at it. So that's been a wonderful thing, as an opportunity for our area around here. We expect the opening of the facility probably the end of this month. I think they're still expecting one electrical part to come in here. Believe it or not, just one small unit, control unit. But as soon as they get in, they'll be able to open it. But that's been a wonderful relationship there.
Very exciting.
And the city of Centerville participated in the Georgia Institute for Community Housing, which allowed the city the opportunity to grant the point to the project, which helped them have favor with DCA when DCA was selecting. And it's important to talk to, when you talk about affordable housing or low-income housing, that these are going to be units that your nurses and your firefighters and your policemen and your teachers and, those people who are in the trenches every day doing the hard work in our community and who are really building up our community, they're kind of in this middle area where they can't necessarily afford to buy a house, or maybe they don't even want to buy a house, but they're even being priced out of just a regular rental unit. And so these are going to fill a little bit of that need. There will always be that need, and it continues to grow as the economy changes and things happen. But this will have 138 units after phase 1 and phase 2 are completed. So phase 1 is the unit you see being built now that should be completed by the end of the month. They have an extremely long waiting list of people who've already applied. The management team that's managing those units is a professional team who are geared toward working with these affordable housing units. So it's not just someone who doesn't understand the process or who's just getting anybody in there, but this is their professional job, is to work these sorts of units. And so you've got the best of the best in there. They're doing the work. They've got enough people applied to fill the units and then have a waiting list beyond that. Yeah. And we'll see construction starting on phase 2 here, honestly, any day. They did a lot of the groundwork for phase 1 and phase 2 at the same time. So phase 2 should come along much quicker. And when it's completed, it will be an additional 80 units.
Oh, wow.
And a second addition, or a second benefit of this is that where this was built, there on the north side of the mall, for years it just sat as vacant gray field space. Yeah. Unused, everyone kind of thought unusable, not really developable space. And so this has taken land that's a scarcity and used it for the betterment of the community as well, which I think is also really important.
Yeah. Well, and with all of the plans you have for town center, the walkability, that's going to promote there, both with Center Park as well as the mall and all the amenities there. It really is just a great fit.
Right, and families or anyone who lives there will be able to walk just across the street from the park. They'll be able to walk into the mall and have a gym membership if they want to, join the mall there and have access to shopping, to grocery, to really any amenity that you want within a 5 to 10 minute walk, just out their front door.
Yeah, it's a true live, work, play environment.
It really is.
So well done.
Yes.
Yes. Anything else y'all want to hit on before we transition to our guest speaker this morning? I see you've got note cards. You got anything else we need to hit on?
Not particularly.
I'm looking forward to this guest speaker.
Yeah.
Because he can validate what we're doing.
Yeah,
And what the city is going for the city. We're trying to grow, we're growing for the citizens. That's our primary concern. And we're trying to do it in a way that we don't owe money. So
there you go.
we like that. We don't like to borrow money unless we really, really, really have to. So that's what's going on now with us.
Very good. Well, and that's a great transition. So, the reason we're here and talking about housing is because it impacts your workforce each and every day. The scarcity of the starter home, if you guys have looked at home prices, there's not anything under 250, maybe 300,000, but we've got projects that are coming to our community like Jack Links, bringing 800 jobs. Those jobs don't necessarily come with houses attached to them. or housing units attached to them, and property is already in scarce supply, even though there's development on every corner. And so I've asked Chris Denson, the Director of Policy and Research at the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, to come share with us a presentation I had the pleasure of hearing I serve on the Georgia Chamber Foundation's Housing Crisis Task Force. And the reason we're invested in this and involved in this is because it impacts, as you mentioned, our service workers, whether it's entry-level jobs or our teachers, our first responders, and others who need access not only to multifamily development, but they need to be able to invest in a home. Home ownership creates wealth, creates a sense of pride, and it works. A rising tide raises all ships for economic mobility. And so I'm very excited for Chris to present not only the data, but also some solutions that are being worked on statewide and things that we can consider here in our local community, in our region as well. Unlike most of our exit issues, we are going to allow for audience Q&A at the end. So as you listen to the presentation, if you want to jot down some notes, and then I'll have microphones that my team can help pass around so that we can make sure you've got access to the expert here while we have him in our fair city. But y'all join me in thanking Shannon and the mayor and welcoming Chris Denson to the stage.
Well, good morning. I tell you, I've probably given close to 24 of these presentations across the state at this point, and I would say that this morning I've experienced hospitality second to none. But also that was a great table setter for what I'm going to speak about a little bit today. On your table, I have passed out a press release for our study on the cost of regulation to build a single-family home in the state of Georgia. Normally, when I give the full presentation, there's about 15 additional slides that really dive into a bunch of tables and data. I'm sparing all of you from that this morning. And if you're interested in learning more about the full study, that QR code at the bottom actually will link directly to that. But as you've heard, my name is Chris Denson. I'm the Director of Policy and Research for the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. We are a 501c3 nonprofit think tank research organization based in Atlanta. We were established in 1991. During that time, we worked on health policy, education policy, tax policy, and it wasn't until 2021 that we launched our first housing policy initiative. And that came about because we had several board members, donors, state and local elected officials around the state that were asking, what can we do to solve this housing crisis? And so in 2021, we started off, and you'll see I've listed a couple of groups that we began having these conversations with. And what became pretty apparent when we had these conversations, when trying to find solutions to these public policy issues, is that you'd speak with a builder, speak with a realtor, speak with a lender, and you'd think you'd wrap your head around the issue, and pretty quickly there'd be about 5 different rabbit holes you could go down. And they'd say, you should speak to my friend that works on this. And there's 5 more issues. And it became pretty apparent how expansive and how deep this issue runs across the state. So we started figuring out how can we provide research to guide the conversation. And there are several elected officials in the room this morning. I'm sure you're probably hearing, what can we do about this? And so we wanted to really be able to put a number to a lot of what we're hearing anecdotally and provide some research to guide the discussion. Before we did that, I put this example up here first. In 2018, the Georgia State House had a Rural Development Council. And it was there at a meeting in Gainesville when a business owner from LJ stood up and said, we do not have workforce housing in LJ. Now, I'm sure many of you in the room are familiar with LJ, but those of you that are not, we're talking about a city of 2,000 people. It's in Gilmer County, 30,000 people. And that let us know, despite what we might see on local news media, it's a rural issue. It's not just a metro Atlanta problem. And then in 2019, the Georgia State House launched their first committee on workforce housing. And the outcome of that was these 4 L's that contributed, 1, to the lack of supply, and 2, to the rising cost of homes. And they were labor, or the lack of workforce to build homes, land, lumber, or building materials, and then laws or regulations. And we evaluated those, and we thought to ourselves, we can't really do anything about these federal lumber tariffs, but we can study laws. We can't do anything about the price of land necessarily, but we can study laws. And I've added, so in 2022, the State House has launched another, it's one of those like 12-word titles, where it's like, Georgia State House Study Committee on the Housing Regulation Work, et cetera, et cetera. But the Georgia Chamber has rechristened it the Georgia State House Study Committee on the Workforce, or the Housing Crisis, which is a lot punchier title. But the outcome in 2022 is the 5th L, and that's lending. And that's suddenly another issue that we have to consider when people are looking to buy a single-family home. So I put this slide up here, and I'm sure many of you are wondering why we have to read a Wikipedia definition. But there is no Wikipedia definition for workforce housing in there. You can scroll down, you read that entire page. There is no definitive answer for workforce housing. And I put that up there because we have a lot of trade associations working on this issue around the state, a lot of other kind of similarly minded groups. But some of them define workforce housing by the type of profession. You heard the mayor of Centerville and Director of Economic Development talk about first responders, teachers. Some groups use that to define workforce housing. Some define it by the average price of a new home. Some define it by the area median income, but there is no consensus answer. So trying to get to solutions is a little more difficult when you don't have a consensus answer on who are we trying to help. I put this slide up here because we began working closely with the American Enterprise Institute and their housing center. I really like the definition they use for their workforce housing development. I put the link at the bottom. I know that print is small, but they started studying in 2012. They created what they call the Carpenter Index. The Carpenter Index is basically, if you can build a home, can you afford to live in it? The industry benchmark here is a 1-to-3 ratio, and what does that mean? Well, that means that if it's a $60,000 annual salary, you can basically afford or spend 3 times as much on a new home. So we're talking about a $180,000 home. And so here you'll see that in 2012, if you have more green, and it's probably not quite as clear as I would like it to be, but you'll see all of the green for carpenters that could build a home across the country and afford to live in there. And granted, we're coming out of a Great Recession then, we had a surplus of homes, but, long story short, you had over 98% of your carpenters in Metro Atlanta could afford to build a home, or could afford to live in a home in 2012. And as you go to 2021, that's suddenly a lot more orange, and it's now close to 37%. Showing that as the price of homes has continued to rise, wages have not kept up, and now there's not supply for your whatever kind of worker you want to call it to live in the home that we workforce housing, service workers, first responders, whatever you want to say. And so that really kind of illustrates the crisis here. And you'll look, not only is it Metro Atlanta that's orange, but you're seeing a lot of red, a lot of orange across the country as well. And I talk about lack of supply. As you'll see on this slide here, this is actually data that shows the number of building permits that were issued statewide for single-family homes. Over 800,000 during the 2000s. And during the last decade, that dropped below 400,000. And so as you'll see, what that means is we've built over 50% fewer homes despite adding 1 million new residents in the last decade. So I go back to that 4th L laws, and we started trying to figure out how we can contribute to the conversation here at the state level. The National Association of Home Builders since 2011 has conducted a study every 5 years on the total cost of federal, state, and local regulations to build a new single-family home. In 2021 was their most recent study. They actually added the cost of lot development for the first time as well. And so we discovered this study, and I reached out and I asked them, I was like, could we replicate this at a state level? And so in January of this year, after partnering with the home builders of Georgia to survey their members, we were able to actually publish this state study that's on your table. And what you'll see is that it was interesting because we took every question that the national survey had and we added one. And that was, what is your local home builders chapter? Because we wanted to be able to go in there and say, okay, why is it more or less expensive to build in Augusta compared to Savannah, compared to Columbus? It didn't quite have the response rate we were looking for from the local chapters. So when we go back and do this again in 2 or 3 years, that's one reason I've been traveling the state so much, to try and raise awareness and encourage participation. But we'd like to be able to go in and break down why is it more expensive or less expensive to build a home across the state. On the bottom of that slide, you'll see here, I always stress to point this out. We're not saying that all building regulations are bad or should be eliminated. What the purpose of this study is to show what those total costs are when you're building a new single-family home. So what did we find? Well, in Georgia, it was a little over 3% higher to build a single-family home than the national average. That's 26.9% compared to 23.8%. You'll see we have the breakdown below that compares the price to build a home during the construction phase, the price to build a home during the development phase. Georgia is in the Navy there. As I mentioned, it's over 3% higher overall. It's roughly a little over 2% on the construction phase and just under 1% on the development phase in terms of difference. And I'll reiterate again, if you're more interested in diving in, the full study explains a little bit more about that. It's just a breakdown as well on the development regulations. That orange block is the highest cost to build a home during the development phase. That's your hard cost of compliance. That's just the fees you pay directly to a government entity to begin development on the lot. And then on the bottom there is 3.2%. I believe that is just additionally the cost of applying for zoning approval. In Georgia, that adds up to 11.3 total. And then, of course, 15.6% total cost of regulation during the building phase. You talk to any kind of builder, they're going to tell you the 3 largest costs they encounter are changes to building codes, design standards, and impact fees. Well, as you look here, that orange block at the bottom, 7%, that's changes to building codes over the last 10 years. We're talking about the energy efficiency standards, things of that nature. And that's also the highest percent nationally, it's about 6.1% on the national average. The second highest, and this is one I always, make an effort to stress, are architectural design standards or aesthetic design standards. We heard a lot from builders and developers and other folks that were involved in housing policy that Georgia is kind of ground zero for design standards. What does that mean? That means requirements like no vinyl siding. That means 4-sided brick. That's detached garage requirements. That's window size minimums, things of that nature. Compared to the national average, Georgia was 4.1%, the national average was 2.7%. Not only that, Georgia builders were like nearly 14 percentage points more likely to encounter design standards. Point of this being, these are not things that add to the safety of a home, but rather artificially increase the price. As I mentioned, I have a bunch of slides where I go through the numbers in detail. I spared y'all from that this morning. But this is always the slide where folks kind of snap back in and they've seen all these percentages. What does that mean? Well, it means if we're talking about a $350,000 home, that means that nearly $95,000 are due to federal, state, and local regulations combined. And you'll see the chart on the side breaks those percentages down by color coding, and 7% is there with changes to building codes. But you think about it, if we make an effort to reduce the cost of one regulation, how much lower we could bring the price down. And that was the purpose of what we tried to set out to study here. These are just a few of the summary points. As you'll see here, that Georgia builders and developers experienced a higher share of these regulations in 9 of the 11 metrics that we surveyed. The one interesting thing is that land dedicated to the government, Georgia developers were a lot less likely to experience that. That's, you can have requirements to set land aside for a school or a park or other things of that nature. And as I mentioned, the architectural design standards. I didn't talk as much about OSHA. It's obviously a federal regulation. And then at the bottom, both developers and builders, if they're separate, encounter fees as well, and it's 5.6% for just the various type of fees that governments impose on them. A couple weeks ago, we published a study on developmental impact fees across the state. I took the screenshot from our website. This is when local governments, cities and counties, will assess on a single-family home or a multi-family apartment per unit to offset the cost for new roads, new you cannot use those to pay for schools in Georgia, new parks, new libraries. Basically, it's an infrastructure fund. You'll look at the map. Middle Georgia, it's not really as big an issue, so I just wanted to include this to kind of show where these are popping up. There's a little bit on the coast as well. It's just a map of cities right here. We also do it for counties too. But I included that link. It's also on our website in case you're interested in learning more about that. So we have a few more upcoming studies. We're actually looking to replicate the cost of regulation study for multifamily housing. We're hoping to have that out by the turn of the year. The National Association of Home Builders does that as well. We're currently surveying multifamily builders in the apartments. And then we're looking at, when the year starts, we're starting to hear popping up around the state, local governments that are imposing lot size minimums, home size minimums, and even some of our most sparsely populated counties, from what we've heard. I think about the most northeastern corner of the state, most southwestern corner. We've heard about these lot size minimums in unincorporated parts of the county, and so that seems to be another thing that's driving up the cost of housing and the lack of supply. That's something else we want to look at as well, and that should be out around the turn of the year. There's my contact information. As April mentioned, we wanted to have a little bit of time for Q&A today, and I'll leave that up there. Happy to flip back to the other previous slides in case there are any other questions. And that was pretty quick, but just wanted to provide a high-level overview. And as we get ready for questions, one thing I do want to say is I had the opportunity to speak before the Carl Vinson Institute of Government at the University of Georgia last week, and I actually had a city council member reach out or make the comment during open Q&A that we get this. It's just that it's the local citizens that you really have to be the ones to educate as well. They're the ones that come and yell at us and say, they think we're building Section 8 homes was mentioned earlier today. And I have a lot of sympathy for that. My father was mayor pro tem for nearly 10 years in Douglasville, where I grew up. Not only that, he was in charge of the planning and zoning committee. And so my mother often asked him when he'd come home at night, why do you want to be in that position where you get yelled at by everyone across the city? And he said, that's where the action is. And so, that being said, I do have a lot of sympathy for that, because I've experienced, go back to 2021, I've experienced my fair share of, what we call NIMBY conversations, not in my backyard. And so, this is a very complex issue. Like I said, we just wanted to contribute one thing, or several things to the discussion going on around the state. We're hoping to have April had mentioned solutions. We're hoping to have a comprehensive policy platform out by summer of 2023. That's what all of this research is working towards. And so with that, I'll open it up to Q&A, and I'm happy to talk about any other housing things generally, not just the study.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. If you have questions, if you will raise your hand, David or I will bring the mic to you. Got one there, and I've got one on this side.
Hi, I'm Sonia.
the screen, not the top, but. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Sonia White, and I work with the Vector Center with transitioning military and veterans. Over the past couple of years, with COVID going on, we had a lot of people calling from out of state that are veterans who transferred or moved here because of whatever case they may be. But when they come here, they don't have a plan and they're homeless. And we have veterans that are already here that have lost their homes because of the fact of COVID, and then all the prices have gone up. We have a lot of people here that are on fixed incomes. So with the fact of the matter of the property going up and the cost of living and everything else has not increased, I'm hearing a lot of phone calls now from people who are homeless and needing someplace to go. It breaks my heart to tell them that I can't find any place because they have waiting lists, and I don't know exactly a solution to that. Me personally, I live in an apartment complex, and in the past year and a half, my rent has went up $400. Come to find out, there was somebody from another state that came here and bought up the property, and they did whatever. And I'm hearing that a lot too. Who controls that? Who controls who can come into the state and buy property and set the prices?
I mean, that's not regulated, so would be open to, you know, I assume the owner of your apartment complex, not without knowing how,
So no legislation or the state or government can control what comes in and what they do?
I'm not quite sure, like, in terms of just someone that owns an apartment complex, what's the question there?
Okay, when somebody comes from another state and buys property in your state, we don't have a say-so on how they do the renting or anything like that, how they run it? We don't control that?
No, ma'am.
Wow. So that's an issue. Because there's a lot of companies or individuals that are coming to this state and they're buying up property because of the fact with COVID, a lot of people lost their jobs and a lot of people couldn't pay rent. The owners who were here previously couldn't handle that, so they sold it for whatever they could. Now you got outside people coming and controlling our rent and everything else, and we're going to have more homeless people here than we had before. They're increasing, and a lot of people, what I've seen, even with the veterans, I've had people call from New York that moved here since COVID. I had people move here from Florida because of whatever reason, and we have a lot of people coming into the state but nobody's leaving. So I don't know what the solution is for that, but that is a problem.
Well, so I'll go ahead and I'll talk a little bit about what we've seen with speaking with, you know, apartment developers. And you know, there is a what our study is looking at, for example, is, you know, when you add, there's a lot of arbitrary just things that are imposed on developers, and when they do that, obviously the price goes up. You know, there's a lady that we've worked with in Atlanta, and she has a philanthropic arm. And it's a nonprofit dedicated to, she buys apartment complexes near underperforming schools in the city of Atlanta. And she went in there and her goal was to rent these apartment units at $600 a month. And by the time the city of Atlanta had finished, you know, the things like, you used to be a right-hand orient instead of a left-hand orient when you walk in the unit, things of that nature, it was up to $770 a month. And so, you know, that's what, you know, to your point about homelessness, you know, the fire code, we're not saying get rid of the fire code. But there are things out there that for, you know, folks that are, you know, on the margins, living week to week, month to month, that we can do to increase the availability of those units, of that housing supply for them, that, you know, we just need to take into account. And you know, I hate hearing that particular story, but if you want to follow up with me, we can talk about some other state solutions after the fact, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Chris. We've got one right here.
Hey, good morning. How you doing? Dan Rhodes, 21st Century Partnership. So I'm a bit of a policy wonk. So this should be pretty interesting. Couple of question here. The Air Force is very interested in ensuring that we have enough workforce housing to meet all of the needs for our airmen at the base, and that includes When I say airmen, I mean little airmen. So all of our military members as well as our civilian workforce that works out there. But that is also important for our communities as well. You talked about the regulatory piece to that. So in a regulatory, you mentioned that there are some regulatory pieces that are necessary and some that we'd like to see changed. Have you written a list of all the regulatory measures in the communities? And where are the ways that we can improve the regulatory measures? Where is the highest level of pain point? Is it at the local level, state level, or federal level? And then finally, once we identify what those regulatory measures are, what are the types of technologies that we can use to streamline those processes to improve the outcome and decrease the cost?
Yeah, thank you for that. In the survey itself, there are obviously some things like OSHA, which are federal or minimally at the state level. Most of these are just combining all of those into one. We survey builders and developers. But you have these conversations and it becomes apparent that quickly most of the regulations are being imposed at the local level. And so with that, you think back to, it's just a conversation that each community, needs to have. I can go through and you talk about the metrics, but at the end of the day, if we're talking about, imposing a four-sided brick regulation, or a Coney County outside Athens, they have effectively banned building on concrete slabs, and they call it a public health issue. You can imagine what that adds to the cost of a home, and you have to have a finished basement. So, each community is different in terms of trying to do a one-size-fits-all approach. I feel like there was about 3 questions in there. I'm blanking on there's something that the other one I was going to try to answer. I know what it was. There are really interesting housing solutions in terms of technology that are popping up across the state. And I think one thing that we could also do at our organization is provide awareness of these, and so that being said, I'm thinking about, as we talk about the lack of building materials and the lumber issues that we're having, are there ways that we can, kind of decrease stigmas around prefab homes, for example? So there are definitely ways that we could be, I think as an organization, more proactive in kind of finding alternatives to the traditional methods we always think about.
So if some of the regulatory issues that you've discovered are local based, would it be beneficial for the localities to see what the cost of those policies are going to impose upon the community as you're trying to build new housing? So for instance, first side, what's that going to add to the cost of every house in the community? That gives our leaders in the community the opportunity to be able to decide, is this something we want to, is it worth actually pursuing that regulation, or do we decrease some of the regulations to improve the outcomes?
Yes, sir. So, for example, on the survey questions, the design standards question is, how much more expensive was it to build than what you would have, without these imposed mandates for a building material? And so that goes back to the question of why we wanted to get the local home builders chapter affiliation, so we could drill down on, kind of regionally, what are the differences. But to your point, yes, without actually going in and doing an assessment, should I make a pitch? We're happy to work with any local city governments that would like to talk about this with us. But yes, you'd have to drill down a little bit more and do particular research on that.
Chris, first of all, thank you for being here today and appreciate our conversation earlier. My name is Jim Taylor. I'm the Development Director for House County Habitat for Humanity. To your point, over at the Vector Center, we need to have a little sidebar conversation. We have a good solution for y'all. But my question is this: with the studies y'all have done throughout the state, are you seeing more and more of an opportunity for public-private partnership opportunities, say like with municipalities and organizations like Habitat or other types of organizations like that? Are you finding it's cost effective? Are you finding there's more of an appetite with our elected officials to do something like that? And if so, how can we facilitate that?
Yes, sir, and thanks for that, Jim. I think it all depends on the willingness of the local government. We've experienced some officials, they're not even close to Middle Georgia, so I'm not casting aspersions on anyone in the room. but folks that, like for example, they've called their communities like aspirational, meaning that they're aware of what they're doing to impose higher costs on to build a home. A lot size minimum, obviously. One of my friends at the Home Builders of Georgia jokes that whenever you give these presentations, you should ask all the builders in the room, who here has built a starter home? And he said, you may see one or two hands right now. And so, going back to what we've studied, I mentioned a number of times I've talked across the state on this issue. I've heard some variation of different regional Georgia dialects. It's just as easy for me to build $1 million home these days as it is a $300,000 home. Now, I'm sure there's an element of being facetious to that, but there's probably a kernel of truth in there somewhere, right? So in terms of public-private partnerships, yeah, there are definitely, anecdotally cities I've heard of that are saying, look, we've got to do something here. We do not have housing to fit our workforce. And colleague of mine that I mentioned earlier in our conversation, he had this conversation with a mayor down in Southwest Georgia, and he said, well, your lot size minimums make it prohibitive for us to build a home in your city. And I'll just say he's a Habitat affiliate. And they said, look, man, we can waive those. We just got to get homes in. And so there is a willingness there. And some of these obviously municipalities are a little bit larger, have a little bit more complex systems. But I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to the willingness to actually go after, investigate the issue, address it, and not just pay lip service to it.
Hey Chris, I'm Kent Jordan with Colony Bank here in Warner Robins. Is there a city in the state of Georgia that has effectively tackled this issue, and one that we could use as an example to address to have the proper inventory of workforce housing in our community?
I'm glad you asked that. So, one thing that I'm very cognizant of when I talk about this is, we just want to put a number on what this one specific issue is. But at the end of the day, we also want to highlight those communities that are actually doing something about it, and you can actually hold up as like a case study or a model for smart reform that had community buy-in. And that was a long-winded answer of me saying no, I don't know. One in particular. But we're all ears, and like I said, we're actually trying to work with. We actually had received interest from a couple of county commissioners, a couple of city councilmen across the state. So hopefully, if April asked me to come back in a year or two and kind of do a follow up on this, we can say, hey, this particular city, this particular county was, man, that they not only addressed this issue, but they did it in a way that not everyone got voted out of office, right? And it goes back to when we started this, we made a very conscious effort to call it housing affordability. Because if we just said affordable housing, people have a certain connotation of that in their brain, and they automatically shut off when they have the conversation. And so, it goes back to that kind of what is workforce housing, and so you have to be very conscious in the way you discuss these issues, and like I said, we're looking for, that would be awesome to have a case study in a year or two from now of a community that really addressed this problem wisely.
Chris, if you don't have one, we're hopeful to be on your short list, and you've got the mayor of the city of Warner Robins here for your next question.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you, Chamber, for setting this up, because as you see, everyone wants to know what are we going to do here in Warner Robins and Houston County. If I understood your presentation properly, it looked like the increase in cost for developers was minimal when it comes to the housing prices we're looking at now. Am I right?
Well, it is cheaper than the costs that are imposed in actual home building, but we're still talking about, 11% on a home. And so, that's $22,000 on a $200,000 home. And so you think about the market and what that means right now, it's significant as well on the development side.
So the reason I asked you that is because from a layman's perspective, it appears somebody is getting richer in the crisis that we are all facing. And I know mostly municipalities are not the ones that are running to the bank with big checks, because developers are coming into our community. So with that stated, me sitting here as with a layman's perspective, it feels as if I question what type of policy there can be that can truly help us with our situation. If, to me, it seems like the bigger issue are the ones that are getting rich off of this, meaning their increase is way higher than it used to be, not for the dollar value, but because of the inflation. And so it almost makes me feel like our only answer or solution could be that we get more low-income tax credits into our communities, because at one point, $60,000 a year was a good job. I remember I was making that and a little bit more when I worked in DC at Crystal City. So that used to be good money. Now you can't even buy a house in our community at all because the costs are so high. So that's a big problem, which makes it sound like $60,000 now is someone who can get a housing with a low-income tax credit program when it comes to multi-family units. So we can either get more low-income housing developers in our communities, or municipalities, hospitals, the military, etc., may find themselves having to be in the business of building units for their employees. So can you give us, I know I said a lot, but I have so many questions.
Yeah.
This bothers me almost weekly. But what exactly are some possibilities in us truly being helped based on policy in our city?
Yep.
If it feels like the real issue are the ones that are getting rich. Not our beloved developers. We're not talking about them. We're talking about the materials and things.
Sure. Yeah, so, on one hand, you think about what we've experienced during the pandemic. And, as the cost of materials continues to rise, the cost of labor continues to rise, the regulations that we studied, home prices have continued to rise. And it's an issue, if people are moving in from out of state, and I'll just use New York for an example. You sell your home in New York, you have a lot more cash to play with when you come down here to the South and you build a home. And so as we see that influx of people moving into, Georgia, Florida, that is one thing that has helped drive up the cost of a home when you have a lot more cash on hand. One thing that the Georgia Chamber Workforce Study Committee that April referenced earlier is looking at is a first-time home buyer tax credit. That would do one thing. My concern with that right now is we don't have enough homes, and we don't have enough of the type of homes that people need to live in. And so we're going to inflate a housing market that's already inflated if we don't do something to try and create an environment in which we're building not only more single-family homes, but you don't see. If you talk to people around the state, you don't duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. That's not really part of the discussed solution right now. And that would go a lot towards kind of solving housing for this missing middle is in terms of the housing product itself is a really popular term right now. It basically means there's nothing between an apartment or a home. We don't have anything to kind of fit that solution as a country. The other thing I'll say is, I know that the Department of Community Affairs has done a lot of low-income tax credits. They've done kind of the approach to providing credits to builders. You talk to builders and developers, and if they have their choice between some kind of innovative tax credit, or if they have just governments letting them build what they want, they say that the strings attached for all those kind of programs that are designed to build specific low-income housing are not worth it at the end of the day for them by the time they get strung along with getting the money. And don't shoot the messenger on that. That's just what I've heard for the last 2 years, is that they'd rather have a clean regulatory environment rather than trying to get any kind of incentive to build. I think specifically the type of housing that you're referring to there.
else? Oh, yes, Shannon. Do you need a mic?
I'm probably real quick. Talking about triplexes, duplexes, things of that nature. I know we're talking primarily about single-family homes, but talking about the missing middle. Are you seeing more openness and willingness from governments to something like an accessory dwelling unit, especially if they're going to keep their lot sizes and not allow those to be smaller?
I'm gonna let you explain accessory dwelling.
Okay, so an accessory dwelling unit is maybe an in-law suite built in a separate small building out in your backyard, or a detached garage with an apartment over it that someone can maybe age in place in, or someone who's in that missing middle can afford to live there and save money to eventually move out on their own. One problem that I feel I run into is that a lot of people looking at it from the outside are concerned that they'll turn into short-term rentals and Airbnbs and things like that, so there's some resistance to those. But I feel like nationally that is kind of a hot topic right now, the accessory dwelling units, and filling that need, even if it's temporarily for a year or two while the market kind of fluctuates and works its way out. So are you seeing more willingness to that in the state?
So I have some colleagues that would argue that if you allow for accessory dwelling units, it actually is just like the, and I apologize for not having a better term on top of my mind, like the gateway drug to additional housing reform.
Right.
That it does kind of fill that need you're referring to, but it also, lets local planners know this is not the end of the world if we institute this type of reform. To give you the example of what opponents say to that, they say that, okay, well, if we allow zoning for accessory dwelling unit, now keep in mind, if we're talking about a neighborhood, you have to build using like the certain HOA regulations or city standards. This is not like a shanty or a lean-to in the backyard.
It's not a shack.
Right, exactly. And a lot of, in Savannah, for example, a lot of the carriage homes would also be considered an accessory dwelling unit. But during the Atlanta mayoral race, this became a very kind of like centerpiece among that affordable housing discussion. And opponents to that would say, okay, well, if we allow for one accessory dwelling unit to a home, why couldn't the builder go and get an accessory dwelling unit to the accessory dwelling unit? And why couldn't the accessory dwelling unit of the accessory dwelling unit have an accessory dwelling unit? So really that's just like, it ain't an argument where you have like this Russian doll of like homes getting smaller on a lot. And so you put that out there, and I would say that like opponents to that particular type of reform, I can't envision that. Have done such a good job of like muddying those waters that it really makes that kind of like unfeasible, despite any kind of like, okay, this has to be built consistently in the style of the same home. I've seen this well across the state. You go back to the duplexes, a lot of, there's really been among architects and engineers like this push to try and make a duplex look as little like a duplex as possible. Now keep in mind, if you have a true duplex, you gotta have two driveways. And so one of them may have kind of the stepping stone look, or like the minimalist driveway. And so it's just interesting that you're seeing folks try to address that missing middle, but yet we're also like artificially inflating like the ways they have to get there to do it. So, Savannah's a good example of where a city where that actually fills like a lot of like young professional housing that they rent, what they call a carriage house, but it's essentially an accessory dwelling unit.
All right, Chris, anything in closing you want to leave us with before we wrap up?
Yeah, I'll just say it's been a pleasure to be here today. I appreciate all the questions, appreciate your time this morning, and I can just tell from the conversations kind of coming in here and what I've heard in terms of the questions that this is definitely a community that is thinking wisely about what the issue is, how do we solve it. And so when I go and speak at North Fulton and leave with a bunch of arrows and gunshots in my back, it's very encouraging that to hear kind of the conversation, the dialogue here this morning. So thank you.
Thank you so much. For the great work that is going into what is obviously a very complex issue and peeling back a few layers of the onion for us. I know you guys have a solutions report you're targeting for summer. I know the Georgia Chamber's housing crisis team that I'm part of is planning to publish their report by the first of the year. So I'm very excited to see that, where it will highlight some best practices and local solutions to help us to address this issue. As Chris mentioned, you can access the full report along with his slides and the links to all of the reference material through the QR code on your table. So you can take a picture of that with your phone or pick this up on your table. Also on your table, December is upon us, guys. Today is 3 weeks from our annual meeting on December 1st, and December seems like a long way away, but once you factor in Thanksgiving and catering deadlines, it's tomorrow. So we encourage you guys, go ahead and reserve your tables. We've already gotten about 20-25 tables reserved, so we know people are excited to come out and help us celebrate the best of 2022. We're going to be back at Southside Warner Robins for a rocking good time. Got some great surprises up our sleeve for this year, so you don't want to miss. Make sure you are intentional in inviting your team. We've got a lot of our presenters provide, just tremendous inspiration. Seeing the great works that our businesses and the individuals who make them special are doing is always a great way for us to put an exclamation point on the year, and we hope that all of you will join us for that. And then on the back of that card, so take one of these with you, we've got the entire schedule. I know we've got a lot of planners in the room who want to know, make sure they're not going to miss any eggs and issues. So this is our entire 2023 lineup on the back. So you can go ahead and put those dates on your calendar and make plans now to join us back here as we continue to have important conversations about how each of you in the room are a critical component of moving our great community forward. It's going to be a great day. We hope to see you guys soon, including Tuesday and business after hours at American Pride Bank. We'll see y'all soon. Thanks, everybody.